Part 22. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn. I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 231. Zhang Lianzi also sat in the study for a long time. Xietingzhou will marry the concubine after the succession ceremony. The news has reached Shengjing a few days ago. Calculating, the auspicious day of the wedding is only a few days away. There is a portrait on the table. The person in the portrait has gentle eyebrows and a faint smile on his lips. He thought of Shen Yu again, those sharp and oppressive eyes when looking at people. This is not the same person at all. What is he obsessed with? Come here, get the brazier. It was getting cold in Shengjing, so he asked for a brazier without asking anything. Thinking that he was cold, he quickly brought the brazier in. Zhang Lianzi picked up the painting and walked over. He let go of his hand and the portrait fell on the brazier. A burning black spot continued to expand, and his hand tightened. Suddenly, he snatched the portrait out of the brazier. There was still a fire burning on it. He put it out with his hands and kicked over the brazier in a hurry. The dust in the brazier filled the air, choking him so much that he couldn't help coughing, but he still held on tightly to the portrait that was burned into two pieces from the middle. When Gao Jin heard the noise and came to check, he was so frightened that he quickly called people in to clean up the mess on the floor, and asked the maid to bring burnt medicine. Zhang Lianzi took his hand and asked the maid to apply the medicine, and said to Gao Jin, "Prepare a gift for me and send it to Balin." Gao Jin was horrified. What kind of ceremony? Wedding gift? Zhang Lianzi asked. What did the young lady like in the past? Young madam, Gao Jin was stunned. Zhang Lianzi came to his senses, lowered his head and recalled for a moment, then said, the jade pillow, the glazed makeup box, the magnolia gilded standing vase in the warehouse. He talked a lot about the ornaments in their former bedroom in their previous life, almost everything in the room. That's all. Zhang Lianzi waved his hand. Go and do it. Gao Jin was hesitant to speak, but decided to ask, didn't the young master ask us to collect these for our marriage? No one will get married, Zhang Lianzi said dejectedly. Find someone to send her to Balin quickly. Don't get ruined. Xietingzhou had already started preparing for the wedding before he left Balin. Uncle Zhong returned to Balin from Shengjing only a few days later than Xietingzhou, and he came back just in time to arrange the wedding. After all, the preparations for marrying the princess were a bit hasty. The palace to the north is decorated with lanterns and colorful decorations, the doors are crowded with guests, and the noise outside can be heard in the inner courtyard. Shen Yu has finished dressing up. She was sitting in the room, wearing a heavy headdress. After covering her head, she could only see the area under her feet. There were 4 maids on the left and right sides of the room, waiting for Xietingzhou to come to welcome the bride. The sedan chair will go around half of the royal capital and then return to the northern palace. I'm still confused now. Should I follow Hezhu's etiquette or our Balin's etiquette? When you do as the Romans do, you should follow the etiquette as we come from the north, right? But according to Balin's etiquette, who will carry the princess to the sedan chair? Yeah, why didn't I think of this? Shen Yu hadn't fully adapted to this new title. It took her a while to realize that it was referring to herself. She listened to the conversation outside and nervously twirled her fingers. She could no longer remember her mood when she got married in her previous life. She was not as nervous as she was now, nor was she overly happy. Perhaps she was escaping more to get rid of the situation at that time. Before he could finish his thoughts, he heard a burst of excitement outside. Here comes the person who will carry the princess into the sedan. Shen Yu wanted to lift her hijab to see who it was, but was stopped by the maid. Princess, you have to wait for the prince to remove your hijab, otherwise it will be unlucky. Footsteps and noises came closer, and they all stopped at the door. Shen Yu saw a pair of muddy boots through the gap between her hanging hijab. The visitor took her hand and put it on his shoulder. Seeing that no one was stopping her, Shen Yu obediently lay on the visitor's shoulder. The man's shoulders were very broad, and he was swaying as he carried her, and he still smelled of sweat. She immediately gave up the idea that this was Xie Tingzhou, and besides, it was against the rules for the groom to carry the bride. After walking for a while, the person carrying her stopped and said, "I have been carrying you for so long, and my brother didn't even know to call out." As soon as Shen Yu heard this voice, her heart couldn't stop beating wildly. "I wanted to lift my hijab, but I resisted." She doesn't want anything imperfect or unlucky, she wants to be with Xie Tingzhou forever. "Why are you here?" Shen Yu's voice was slightly crying. Shen Zhao carried her on his back and started walking again. "Brother said he would marry you on his back, how could he break his promise? If you want to blame Xie Tingzhou. He didn't tell me that you were going to get married when you came back, which made me die for days. I ran all over the place and finally caught up, I didn't even have time to change my boots." Shen Zhao noticed a drop of water dripping from the back of his neck, and then heard the girl sniffing. Crying again. Shen Zhao originally wanted to say something from the bottom of his heart, but felt that it was too emotional. He probably would have cried more fiercely, so he let it go. Shen Zhao bumped her up. "Hurry up, I'm in a hurry. If you don't go out, you'll miss the right moment." Shen Zhao's pace suddenly became faster, and Shen Yu tightened her grip on his neck, thinking that her father was not here, but her brother was here, and now it could be considered complete. Shen Zhao sent her to the sedan chair and looked up at Xie Tingzhou, who was standing on the horse. Xie Tingzhou nodded to him and made a promise to him silently. 8 people lifted up the sedan chair, and the suana and firecrackers sounded in unison. The sedan chair passed through the royal capital, and the streets were crowded and empty. It circled around and returned to Balan Palace again. The sedan curtain was kicked open and a piece of red silk was handed over. She saw that familiar hand with distinct joints, and she would walk hand in hand with him until the end of her life. It was still busy outside. Shen Yu sat on the couch, rarely feeling so calm in her heart. There were footsteps outside. "Oh, Your Majesty, there are still guests outside." Xie Tingzhou stepped into the new house, but stopped and stood at the door looking at her. Shen Yu obviously heard the familiar footsteps, but she didn't see him coming to lift the hijab for a long time. She couldn't help but pinch the corner of the hijab to take a peek. "Don't move." Xie Tingzhou walked over. "I'll come." He took the jade ruyi from the tray held by the maid, took a deep breath, and slowly opened his hijab. She put on makeup today, which made her face look even brighter. Xie Tingzhou stared blankly for a long time. It was so long that Shen Yu began to wonder if today's makeup was too thick and a little strange. Just as he was about to reach out and touch his face, Xie Tingzhou grabbed his hand. "Stop the boat." Shen Yu looked at him doubtfully. Xie Tingzhou stared at her for a moment. "What should you call me?" "Your Majesty." Xie Tingzhou smiled and leaned close to her. "My prince, anyone can scream, but husband, only you can scream." Shen Yu pursed her lips and said, "Husband." The two were very close, and Xie Tingzhou's eyes were burning. The maid had already retreated. Not everyone dared to make trouble in the king of Balan's bridal chamber. The yard was extremely quiet, and I could vaguely hear the excitement in the front yard. Shen Yu thought about whether the two of them should say something since they were getting married today. The string that Xie Tingzhou had stretched for too long broke without warning. It was the rope that bound the beast. Their lips and teeth were pressed together, and he held a scalding fire in his hand. The fire burned more fiercely than ever before, burning up the clothes and heating up the bed curtains. Xie Tingzhou thought about the feeling of having her pressed under him countless times in his dream, but never like this moment. She didn't want to miss every expression of her pain, endurance, joy, and satisfaction. Her hair was stuck to her face with a thin layer of sweat. Xie Tingzhou pushed her hair aside to kiss her and saw the moisture in the corners of her eyes. Shen Yu's cheeks were buried in the quilt, soaked by him in this cold night. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 232. The shadow of the carved window edge was cast on the wall by the sunlight, and Shen Yu finally struggled to wake up. Looking back at the bed tent in confusion, I felt a little regretful. My body was as tired as if I had fought a battle, as if I had been run over countless times by a carriage. Shen Yu gently pulled away the hand that was wrapped around her body, and prepared to roll over Xie Tingzhou and get up to wash herself. Just when he was halfway up, Xie Tingzhou pulled him back by his arm, pressed him on top of him, and said in a hushed tone, "It's still early, let's sleep a little longer." Xie Tingzhou was also very tired. As a result, he lay down just before dawn and slept for less than 2 hours. In this life, Shen Yu had no education before getting married, but she still remembered the rules of her previous life. The bride has to get up early to offer tea to her elders. She also has to get up to dress up. If she doesn't get up, it will be too late. I have to get up. Shen Yu struggled in his arms. Xie Tingzhou persisted, "What are you doing up?" "I want to get up and serve tea to my parents-in-law." Xie Tingzhou said nothing, as if he was fast asleep again, but his arms were tightly wrapped. Shen Yu struggled again, and Xie Tingzhou simply turned over and half-pressed her underneath, burying himself in her neck and talking. "We don't have this rule. My dad might not even get up yet." Shen Yu didn't sleep well to begin with, so she gave up completely and fell asleep again. After a while, there was a lot of flapping sounds outside under the eaves, completely waking Xie Tingzhou up. Seeing that Shen Yu was still sleeping, Xie Tingzhou stood up and pulled the quilt for her, put on her robe and opened the door. "What's the noise about?" Bai Yu was flapping his wings under the eaves, looking at him with a bad temper. 11 Feng came early in the morning and did not dare to approach. He only dared to come forward when he saw Xie Tingzhou getting up. Xie Tingzhou rubbed the back of his neck, his outer robe hanging loosely. His eyes were half opened, the redness on his neck had not faded, and his whole body showed a sense of relaxation and laziness after being satisfied. Zifeng only took one look and then didn't dare to look again. He lowered his eyes and said, "Maybe he's hungry. Hai Dongqing is the king of falcons, and he still has a bit of wildness in him." After returning to Balin, he was like a wild horse running wild. He flew out in the wild for a few days before returning. When he came back, his claws and beak were still stained with blood and meat residue, and he didn't know where he had gone hunting. Xie Tingzhou tied it with a chain and asked it to calm down. "I woke up late today and no one came to feed it, which made me unhappy. Go get some grouse." Xie Tingzhou stepped forward, and Bai Yu immediately jumped on his arm. When Xie Tingzhou untied the anklet, he heard it make an unhappy cooing sound. "Are you hungry? No one came to feed you. This is the first time I'm full." After saying that, he laughed casually, turned his head and called out, "Come here." The maid who was standing far away hurriedly came forward, not daring to look directly at him, just lowering her head and waiting for instructions. Xie Tingzhou stroked Bai Yu's feathers with the back of his fingers to comfort him, and ordered, "Prepare something light for breakfast and some clear porridge. The princess doesn't like thick porridge. Prepare side dishes for when she wakes up before cooking. Don't incense your clothes. She didn't like Rigzun's clothes yesterday." After saying that, he raised his arm and made Bai Yu jump to the railing. He turned around and walked to the door. He thought of something and turned around halfway, his eyes swept across the maids. The maids lowered their heads lower. Xie Tingzhou said, "There is no need to keep so many people in the yard, just 2. These maids are not familiar with her preferences. You send people to Hezhu to pick up the 2 girls who are serving her personally, as well as De Wang." "Yes," Zifeng asked, "it's Liu Yao and Arya, right? What about Hongqiao?" Xie Zhou was silent. Forget it, wait until she wakes up and ask her. 11 Feng retreated in response, and Xie Zhou returned to the room. Then he saw Shen Yu lying on the pillow, her face turned sideways and her eyes half open. It still woke me up. Xie Zhou sat on the edge of the bed, his fingertips traced down from her brow bone, stopped on her earlobe and gently twisted it. Would you like to get up and eat? Shen Yu shook her head and muttered, it hurts. Where does it hurt? Xie Zhou asked funnily. Shen Yu moved her shoulders and said, it hurts everywhere. Then I'll rub it for you. Xie Zhou rubbed the back of her neck, looking at her expression of comfort and satisfaction, and then cast his eyes on her earlobes. He remembered the expression on this place last night when he was holding it in his mouth, and his body began to feel hot again, and his hand slid down involuntarily. What are you doing? Shen Yu was completely awake. Xie Zhou pressed on her back before she turned over, put his lips to her ear and said in a hoarse voice, I'll have breakfast. Shen Yu was run over by a car again. She didn't eat the so-called breakfast until noon, and she couldn't open her eyes. Xie Zhou said that he didn't need to ask for greetings, but he really didn't need to. The old prince himself was a casual person, and he was most bothered by the red tape, so that people would just send the gifts to the bride. There were many people sitting in the palace's meeting hall, all of whom were aides and lower-level officials of the palace. The wedding delayed a lot of things. The prince was newly married, and the people below did not dare to bother him with troubles. It took 7 days before the discussion started. Many government affairs were waiting for Xie Zhou's decision. After a busy morning, the staff and officials were all invited to have dinner in the side hall. Xie Zhou left the meeting hall and prepared to return to the courtyard to have dinner with Shen Yu. Chang Lu sat at the door and picked out ants for a long time. When he saw Xie Zhou, he quickly stepped forward and said, Your Majesty, are you going back to find the princess? Xie Zhou glanced at him, indicating that he was asking questions knowingly. Chang Liu said, the princess asked me to tell you that we won't have lunch together. She went to the school grounds. Xie Zhou stopped and asked, going to the school grounds? When? I went early in the morning, Chang Liu said. Xie Zhou nodded, I understand. After walking a few steps, he asked again, are you wearing a cloak? No, Chang Liu was smarter this time, then I'll have someone prepare it and I'll send it to the princess. Xiao Chuan and the soldiers have been training in the school field since they came to Bailin from Shengjing. The 4 major campuses in the east, west, south, and west of the royal capital are all Qingyun guards. They are arranged in the south campus where there are fewer people. Xiao Chuan was ordered to recruit troops again these days, with more than 10,000 new recruits, and the south campus was now overcrowded. Xiao Chuan couldn't bring up the matter of school expansion directly with Xie Zhou, so he could only invite Shen Yu to discuss it. These new recruits are so damn hard to control. Xiao Chuan squatted on the ground, chewing a white-faced steamed bun. The people in the north have really different physiques from those in the south. I don't know what they ate to grow up. Yes, all of them are big-hearted and wild-tempered. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Treating the Concubine, Eliminating the Wife, Reborn, I Refuse to Marry the Scumbag and Marry the Prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 233. The weather today is very cold, and you can breathe out white air when you open your mouth, but the sun is not bad, and the sun can still make people squint. Shen Yu stood under the shade of the tree, looking at the group of undisciplined recruits from a distance. Xiao Chuan was complaining to her, and Shen Yu kept listening. She knew it was not easy for Xiao Chuan. In the past few months, she was either in Hezhu or on the road. Things here were beyond her reach and were left to Xiao Chuan. How many recruits are there? Shen Yu asked. 12,000, plus our original 5,000 people, It will be 17,000. Shen Yu lowered her eyes and looked at Xiao Chuan, who was eating steamed buns. You have never led so many soldiers, have you? Xiao Chuan raised his head and said, I never brought it with me. The man has ambitions in all directions. He is grateful to Shen Yu and knows that Shen Yu is training him and giving him a chance. No one else could ask for such an opportunity. It was impossible to have such an opportunity without spending more than 10 years in the military camp and achieving military exploits. If you're leading troops, you have to polish them, Shen Yu said. The edges and corners have to be smoothed out for them, leaving behind the blood. How to grind it? Xiao Chuan asked. He was several years older than Shen Yu, but he couldn't compare to her, and he was convinced of this. Shen Yu smiled slightly and said, when you were in the camp, how did your father punish you? Xiao Chuan was thoughtful and seemed to understand a little bit. Shen Yu sighed, it's not easy, just take your time. Xiao Chuan stood up after swallowing the last mouthful of steamed buns and glanced sideways at Shen Yu. She was wearing women's clothes today, with a white fox fur sent by Changliu. She was petite and her skin was healthy white. Her appearance was very outstanding among the ladies of Shengjing, but she looked a little out of place in the military camp. The gang of soldiers and gangsters secretly glanced here from time to time. After all, she was the princess and they didn't dare to look at her openly. Xiao Chuan hesitated to speak, but it was difficult to say some words, so he swallowed them back. Is General Han at the school grounds? Shen Yu asked. Ah, yes. Xiao Chuan was stunned for a moment before saying. Shen Yu said, I'll go talk to him about expanding the school grounds, and you can go about your business. Although she is the princess of Balin, matters in the military camp should still be handled according to the rules, and the following will be coordinated and reported before reporting. Xiao Chuan sat under the tree for a while, calculating that it was almost time, and asked someone to notify the troops for training. The announcement was over, and when it was time to assemble, the school grounds were sparsely crowded. From time to time, people walked over slowly, looking for their place in the crowd. Xiao Chuan watched calmly. 2 moments had passed since the assembly time, and everyone had not arrived yet. Xiao Chuan walked up to the general ordering platform and said, report the number of people. I reported the number of people below, but there were still more than 300 people missing. This has happened more than once, and Xiao Chuan knows where those people are. Go and drag those people out. If they can't get up, pour cold water on me to wake them up. More than 300 people were brought to the school grounds. Many of them had just been pulled out of their beds and were standing around in a daze. Some of their clothes were soaked. He didn't stand well and his soldiers didn't look like soldiers, which made Xiao Chuan feel angry. Everyone. Run 10 laps around the school grounds, 15 of those who are late, and 20 of those who are caught by me. A burst of dissatisfied wails suddenly sounded on the school grounds. One of them, soaked all over, yelled, why? We came to join the army to kill the enemy. All we have to do is run around and carry sandbags. It's useless. The gang of soldiers and ruffians were also angry at first, and they also followed suit below. There was a prick who couldn't stand it any longer. He didn't think much of Xiao Chuan, so he took advantage of the crowd to be emboldened and vented all his dissatisfaction. General Xiao, we came to join the army for the Qingyun Guards. Who knew we were here for this? It's normal for brothers to have opinions. Qingyun Guards, Xiao Chuan pointed to the other side of the Qingyun Guards training ground and said, look at them, and then see if you are worthy of it. Qingyun Guards run 30 miles with a heavy load every day, and you are tired after running 10 miles. You dare to mention Qingyun Guard to me? Then what's going on? Ci Erdu said, they are the soldiers brought out by the prince, but what about us? Xiao Chuan, what happened to us? The thorny head said, General Xiao is not afraid of jokes for following a woman, but don't drag the brothers along with him to embarrass himself. We want to follow the prince to the battlefield, not follow a woman to learn tricks and embroidery. The person next to him pulled him, and Ci knew that he was referring to the princess when he opened his mouth and closed his mouth to a woman. He felt that he had gone too far, but he couldn't keep his face down. After all, what he said was the truth. You don't look down on women, do you? Xiao Chuan said coldly, who here is not a mother-in-law. Stand up for me. No one came out below, but in the commotion, someone inside said, how can this be the same? Just because we are mothers, it doesn't mean that we have to take orders from a woman. Yeah. That's right. The people below took advantage of the strength of the crowd, and their words became more and more unpleasant. General Xiao, his legs are weak in front of women, don't drag us together. What benefits have you gained from others? We are not happy to chase after you and lick your butt. Xiao Chuan was furious. Who the hell said that? Stand up for me. There was a buzz below, but no one came forward. There was actually someone who took advantage of the crowd and couldn't find it, and secretly said, if you dare to do it, let no one talk about it. Xiao Chuan has heard many people gossiping behind his back, saying that Xiao Chuan is a weakling who takes orders from a woman. He also said that the two of them had an affair behind each other, and they followed a woman all the way from Shengjing to Bailin, leaving their official duties in Beijing. He could hear it, but the words could not reach Xie Tingzhu's ears. He had hesitated to say anything to Shen Yu before, just because he wanted to say this, but it was difficult to speak. After Shen Yu and Han Jiwu talked about the expansion of the school ground, they ran into this commotion when they came out. Han Jiwu's face turned livid when he heard this, but Shen Yu was calm and turned to Han Jiwu and said, General Han, go and get busy. Shen Yu walked that way. As she approached, the soldiers also noticed her, and everyone's voices gradually stopped. The real Princess Bailin only gossiped about people behind their backs, and no one dared to say it to their faces. The school grounds were extremely quiet, except for the sound of Qingyun guards training on the other side. Shen Yu slowly walked up to the general stage and saw Xiao Chuan's cheeks turned red and he was breathing heavily. Princess Xiao Chuan said. Shen Yu nodded slightly but did not rebuke. Anyone would be angry if they were pointed at and scolded like this. She understood Xiao Chuan. Shen Yu stood still on the general stage, glanced at everyone with a calm gaze, and said calmly, I am here today. If you have any opinions and dissatisfaction, let's talk about it. Let's solve it one by one. The audience was completely silent. The soldiers and ruffians who had been talking plausibly just now were all turned into quails at this moment. Shen Yu smiled lightly, what? Just now, everyone was talking plausibly, but now they are speechless? Just say it. Someone below finally couldn't help it anymore and said, you are the princess, how dare we say anything, otherwise our heads will fall off if we say the wrong thing. What you just said was very good, and your heads are still hanging firmly around your neck. Shen Yu paced on the stage and said, if you don't say it, then I will do it. You don't look down on me. It's okay. It's easy to solve this matter today. We are all soldiers. Whoever has the toughest fist will be the one the final say. The head of the assassins said, you are the princess of Bailin now. Who dares to really fight with you? Aren't they afraid that the Qingyun guards will come and crush us? Don't you dare to take action, Shen Yu's voice suddenly turned cold. You don't dare to take action but you only dare to speak. What's the matter? You have learned the trick of a gentleman who speaks but does not take action and applied it to the military camp? A group of grown men gathered together and chatted. But she is more talkative than the housewife I saw in Shengjing. My eyes have been opened today. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 234. This was not a pleasant thing to say, and it made everyone blush and stomp the faces of a bunch of new recruits into the mud. They were all young and energetic soldiers, but they were embarrassed by a woman who pointed at them and scolded them, so they couldn't sit still anymore. The people below began to whisper to each other, and the noise was as loud as a vegetable market. Han Jiwo watched on the side and thought that this was not okay. The prince protected the princess like an eyeball. If this matter was spread to the prince from others, he would have to be punished. Just as he was about to go find Xie Tingzhou, he saw Xie Tingzhou and Chang Hong coming. "Your Majesty, this." Han Jiwo was thinking about how to speak. Chang Hong looked at it for a moment and said, "Are you a new recruit? There are thorns everywhere. Do you want to?" Xie Tingzhou raised his hand to stop him and just watched from a distance, not intending to take care of the matter. Shen Yu narrowed her eyes slightly due to the sun. "We have been discussing for a long time, have we come up with a result?" "Don't worry about my mother-in-law." The people below said, "The princess wants to challenge us to a duel, but the sword has no eyes. What if she is injured?" "How do you calculate it?" Shen Yu smiled. "It's bad luck for him. I won't show off my weapons. I will use whatever knife you use." Shen Yu took off the yinfeng from her waist, threw it to Xiao Chuan, and looked at everyone. "If anyone can pass under my sword today, Shen Yu, I will call you Lord when you are in the army. I have 5,000 soldiers and horses. It's up to you, but if you can't, then shut up." The crowd below was buzzing for a while, and a man jumped on the stage. "I'll do it." "Okay," Shen Yu glanced at him approvingly. Regardless of how much he weighed, he still had courage, which is indispensable when joining the army. "Weapons of your choice." The man chose his weapon. "It's the princess's turn." Shen Yu slid her right foot to the side, and her two long and slender hands came out of the fox fur and made a gesture. The audience was in an uproar. Do you mean to fight him with bare hands? You don't even use weapons. That's a bit too conceited." The man was surprised and said, "Don't you choose a weapon, princess?" Shen Yu didn't talk nonsense to him. "Be careful." As soon as she finished speaking, Shen Yu curled her lips, and with lightning speed, she clenched her fist and attacked the man. The man moved his sword to block it, but Shen Yu slapped the opponent on the arm. The man felt that the palm struck his arm numb, and he almost lost his hand with the knife. The force was not great, but the force was very skillful. The man was frightened. He was worried that the person he was fighting was the princess, but now he used all his strength and slashed her head. There was a roar from the audience. They saw the woman in white fox fur flying up like a wild goose, stepping on the weapon rack and turning around in the air, with her toes slightly on the blade of the sword, and she swept the man's head in the air with her kick. The man quickly used his left arm to block it. His arm hurt. Before he could react, the knife was removed and he received another kick in the chest. The man took several steps back, but finally lost his balance and fell to the ground. Shen Yu has landed steadily. The man fell to the ground and didn't react, but it was only a few moves, so he didn't see clearly how he lost. Shen Yu tipped the knife in her hand to test the feel, then looked at the silent crowd. "Is there anyone else? The Qingyun guards have finished their military training and can rest. I heard the commotion here during the military training just now, and everyone wanted to watch the excitement, so now they rushed over there. Last year, a boy challenged the Qingyun guard in Yanliang Pass, and finally mocked the Qingyun guard. Although many people had never seen it with their own eyes, they had heard about it, and they never imagined that the boy would later become their princess. Many people who had never seen it felt that it was exaggerated after hearing it. Today was just the right time to watch the fun. There were many people in the audience who were eager to give it a try, and there were also a few who did not believe in evil and insisted on going up to compete. The princess's attacks are much sharper than last year. Chang Hong stood beside Xie Tingzhou and said, "I don't want to humiliate people anymore. I will fight quickly." As expected of the princess, her temperament has become much calmer. Xie didn't answer and looked at the white bird fluttering lightly on the general stage. There were cheers and boos everywhere, but he just watched quietly. That was his Luan bird, no one could conquer it, but she was willing to fold her wings for him and rely on his arms. No one knew what she hid beneath her sharpness, except him. Just thinking about this made Xie feel happy. Another group of Qingyun guards who were training in the square on the other side also ran over. A soldier rolled up his sleeves as he walked and said, "I heard that the new recruits are fighting in a one-on-one battle. I'm going to join in the fun, and my brother is going to teach them a lesson." Another person said, "I heard that the princess is taking care of the new recruits." Ah, the soldier was stunned and put down his sleeves again. "Then let's have a fight and watch the fun." That person was Tu Si, who had a fight with Shen Yu at Yanliang Pass last year, and was beaten to a disgrace. Several new recruits who did not believe in evil were knocked down from the general stage. Tu Si looked at it proudly. "I managed to survive 100 moves at the hands of the princess, but these crooks dare to go up and fight with the princess. They are overestimating their abilities." Someone laughed and said, "Your 100 tricks are just for the princess to show mercy to, so don't show them off." "I'll just show off," Tu Si said. "If you have the ability, you can try 100 moves, but, the princess is a little impatient today." Xie also noticed that Shen Yu was very impatient and could not win more than one move within 10 moves, and his brows were slightly furrowed. After the continuous battle, Shen Yu was slightly panting. He kicked the opponent's weapon away, put the knife on the soldier's neck, and slowly approached with his feet. The soldier was frightened by this momentum and just took a step back. Shen Yu threw the knife to the ground hard, and the steel knife was nailed to the ground, flashing with cold light as it shook. Shen Yu glanced at everyone coldly. "Are you convinced?" No one spoke. Tu Si laughed loudly, his voice like a bell. "I'm convinced, princess, we Qingyun guards are convinced." Those new recruits didn't have the ability to resist. Some were convinced, and those who couldn't bear to admit it didn't dare to say anything. Shen Yu raised her voice, "Now that you are convinced, the farce is over. If you are still unconvinced in the future, you can try it, but next time, I will not show mercy." Shen Yu walked past Xiao Chuan and said, "Follow me." Xiao Chuan nodded and said to the new recruits, "What are you looking at? Just come as I arranged before, let's run." He quickened his pace to catch up with Shen Yu. "Princess, it's my fault today." Shen Yu stopped and asked, "What's your problem?" Xiao Chuan thought for a while. "I didn't manage the soldiers well. If I had known that they would surrender after a fight, I would have taken over instead. The princess would not have to suffer. Their dissatisfaction is directed at me." Shen Yu said, "It's useless for you to take action, but you did not do enough today." Xiao Chuan, "Please give instructions, princess." Shen Yu said, "When new soldiers enter the camp, they should first establish rules. Military discipline is the most important thing. Discipline is the most fundamental guarantee for command and combat to be effective." Xiao Chuan accepted the instruction and nodded repeatedly, then saw Shen Yu frowning. "Is the princess feeling unwell?" "No," Shen Yu said, "go ahead and do your work. Thank you for your hard work." As soon as Xiao Chuan left, Xie walked up to her and looked down at her. "Are you in a bad mood or feeling unwell?" Shen Yu raised her eyes to glance at him and said unhappily, "My waist is still sore." As soon as Xie raised the corner of his lips, she glared at him. The soldiers around him dispersed for training. Xie looked back and found that no one was paying attention, so he simply hugged her sideways. Shen Yu was startled and scolded in a low voice, "Put me down." Xie calmly carried her out of the school grounds and carried her all the way to the carriage. "Why don't you come here on horseback?" Shen Yu asked. "The South Campus is quite far away from the capital, and it takes half an hour to ride a horse." The carriage is too slow. I came here specifically to pick you up. Is your waist still sore? Xietings whose hands kneaded her waist gently. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 235. Shen Yu goes to the school grounds every day. Xieting Zhou has official business to attend to, so he can't go there every day and only sees people at night. It was when he was addicted to her that he was even more clingy than before. Today, he kept her in the palace and moved his official duties to the study. Brother, they are fast on their feet. They should have passed Ping Zhou by now. Shen Zhao returned to Hezhu the day after his wedding, and happened to be with the people sent by Zifeng to pick up the maid. After all, Shen Zhao was still a newlywed. He came all the way for Shen Yu's wedding, but he couldn't bear to leave his new wife at home, so he had to rush back quickly. After Xieting Zhou finished speaking, he didn't hear a reply for a long time. He raised his head and saw her immersed in the case, calculating something seriously. What's that? Don't interrupt. Shen Yu didn't even raise her head, holding a pen in one hand. After finishing the calculation, she raised her head and asked, "What did you just say?" Xieting Zhou pointed with his chin. Oh, Shen Yu tapped on the ledger, "I'm calculating the military requirements for the 5,000 troops and new recruits next season." Xieting Zhou picked up the account book and looked at it. The calculation was very beautiful. It was really inspired by the home of the #1 merchant in the Great Zhou dynasty. Xieting Zhou was watching her calculations from the side, when he suddenly heard hurried footsteps outside the door. If nothing happened, the servants would not dare to leave in such a hurry. "Your Majesty, Princess." Xieting Zhou turned his head and asked, "What's the matter?" The maid said outside the door, "Someone came to deliver a gift, saying it was a wedding gift for the prince and princess, and it came from Sheng Jing." Shen Yu was also surprised for a moment. "Are you sure it's from Sheng Jing?" Sheng Jing had no relatives or friends, and she couldn't think of anyone else who would send gifts. Could it be sent by King Yan? Xieting Zhou and Li Jifeng are close friends, but the current situation is uncertain. Go and have a look. Xieting Zhou and Shen Yu left the palace. Several carriages stopped in front of the palace, and a group of people giving gifts were also waiting at the door. The leading man with a mustache saw the large number of people coming out of the gate and hurriedly stepped forward with a complacent smile. "I have met the prince and princess. The young one is here from Shengjing to send wedding gifts." "Which house is it from?" Xieting Zhou asked. Only then did the mustache remember. He took out the post and presented it with both hands. "The younger one is from Jiang's house, and is here to deliver the gift for my young master, Mr. Jiang, the Minister of Household Affairs." Xieting Zhou lowered his outstretched hand and looked sideways at Shen Yu. Shen Yu was also confused. "I don't know." Mustache held the post and said, "The things in this car are all wedding gifts given to the princess by the minister." Others present did not know the inside story and thought the two had a good relationship when they were officials in the same court, but Shen Yu and Xieting Zhou knew it very well. Shen Yu saw Xieting Zhou's jaw clenching and then slowly relaxing. Xieting Zhou's tone was slightly cold. "Since it is a congratulatory gift for the king's princess, we will accept it." Just when Shen Yu was about to speak, Xieting Zhou gently squeezed her hand and shouted, "Changliu." Hey, Changliu jumped forward. Xieting Zhou asked, "Is it cold today?" Changliu was stunned for a moment. "Of course it's cold. My little turtle was frozen. It didn't move a few days ago. I thought it was going to die, but..." Once Changliu opened his mouth, he couldn't close it. Xieting Zhou interrupted him, "Then go and get the kerosene." "Master, I will light a bonfire for you." "Okay," Changliu responded, turned around and ran away. When the bearer who gave the gift heard it, he felt that something was wrong, but he did not dare to ask directly. Zifeng opened the carriage with the handle of his knife and took a look inside. Why is it all wrapped in oil paper? Why is it so tightly wrapped? Mustache said, they are all rare wooden items and some silk. I was afraid they would get wet on the road, so I wrapped them all up. 11 Feng nodded and made a gesture, and the palace guards came forward to move things. There were a lot of boxes, and the 2 guards carried them down one at a time. 11 Feng stood aside and didn't count them. They would be burned anyway, so it would be useless to count them. Mustache held out another small box and said, Princess, these are the things that my master has told me to hand over to you personally. They are all your favorite things in the past. The box slowly opened. Xieting's whose expression suddenly changed, he grabbed Shen Yu with one hand and pulled out the sword of the guard beside him. Hearing an ah sound, Mustache grabbed his wrist and screamed. The hand was completely broken from the wrist, but there were 2 severed hands on the ground, one was fresh and bloody, the other was black, and there was an empty box. The guards all drew their swords in unison, and in an instant they restrained all the gift givers. Mustache was in so much pain that he kept screaming, Your Majesty, please spare my life, Your Majesty, please spare my life. Xieting Zhou looked at the man coldly. Zhang Ji asked you to deliver the severed hand. Mustache ignored the pain and was stunned when he saw the things in the box. No, no, how could there be a severed hand here? It's obviously. What is it? The mustache almost twitched in pain. Yes, it is the personal belongings of the princess. Xieting's whose eyes flashed with danger, and the tip of the knife touched Mustache's neck and drew blood. Say it again, again. Xieting Zhou said every word. Mustache gasped, it's jewelry. It's the jewelry that the princess wears in her boudoir. You're talking nonsense, Shen Yu said angrily, when did I ever give him jewelry? The younger one is just giving gifts, I really don't know. Open, Shen Yu said coldly, open all the boxes. The guard was stunned when the first box was opened, followed by the second and third, a dozen boxes, all containing the same thing. Xieting Zhou knew something was wrong, so he let go of Shen Yu and let her stand where she was before taking a closer look alone. His eyes swept across the boxes one after another, without mentioning a word, but he suddenly raised the knife. The sword flashed, and a boy delivering gifts fell to the ground, covering his neck. Shen Yu raised her feet and stepped forward. Xieting Zhou, stand there and don't come over. These words could not stop Shen Yu at all. She had to find out for herself what was in these boxes. As she came closer, the contents of the box were revealed. It's people, dead people. Zhang Lianzi sent her a dozen corpses. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, Reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 236. Take them all into custody for trial, Xieting Zhou said coldly. Everyone who gave the gift was imprisoned. The person in charge of the interrogation below was very clever. In less than half an hour, Zifeng and Changliu had obtained the confession and sent it over. Xieting Zhou had just taken a bath, and some blood spattered on his body when he cut off the mustache's hand. 11 Feng handed over the confession and briefly explained the situation. All of them insisted that they did not know anything. The things were sealed when they were loaded into the truck. They were only responsible for transporting them. Only Chen Guang had his hand chopped off by the prince. Well, he said that he secretly looked at the small box, and it did contain jewelry, including a hairpin, a wooden comb, and a small wooden sword. Shen Yu was not impressed by the other objects, but she was deeply impressed by the small wooden sword. Shen Zhao made it for her when she was a child to coax her. She had specifically searched for it when she went back to Shen Mansion to move things, but she couldn't find it, but she didn't know how it ended up in Zhang Lianzi's hands. After Xieting Zhou finished reading the confession, he turned his head and saw Shen Yu lowering her eyes and thinking, "What's wrong? I never gave him those things." Shen Yu said, "I don't know about the hairpin and wooden comb, but the small wooden sword is indeed mine." Xieting Zhou put the confession on the table. "It's not difficult to guess. The things were transferred on the way." "Why is the prince so sure?" Chang Lu was puzzled. Xieting Zhou looked at him sideways, as if he were looking at an idiot. "It's a long way from Shengjing to Bailin. If the dead people were transported when packing, they would be reduced to skeletons by the time they get to Bailin." Chang Liu suddenly realized, "Yes. That's right. The corpses have all been examined by Feng Yang. They were dead less than 2 days ago." Xieting Zhou remained motionless. It's unclear whether the person who transferred the contract was someone Zhang Ji hired, or someone else. What to do with those people? Xieting Zhou finally raised his head. "Leave the one with the severed hand, but leave the rest alone. Let him go back and report a message to Zhang Ji. Find someone to follow him. Don't let him die on the road. Make sure he returns to Shengjing alive." Chang Liu was confused when he heard this. "But Prince, wasn't that thing transferred? Zhang Ji must have been tricked." Xieting Zhou ignored him and ordered them to retreat. Of the 4 people in the room, only Chang Liu couldn't understand. Regardless of whether the body was sent by Zhang Ji or not, even if it was a serious gift, sending something as personal as a hairpin and a wooden comb still seemed like a provocation. And Xieting Zhou is the person who hates provocation the most. After they went out, Xieting Zhou leaned in his chair and looked at Shen Yu. "How did your things fall into his hands?" Shen Yu took a look at Xieting Zhou's expression. She was unhappy and depressed. She wanted to get angry, but she held back. "You doubt me? Do I dare?" Xieting Zhou leaned forward and propped his elbows on the table. "How did that thing get into his hands? You have to think about it. That person is definitely not one of our own." "I thought about it." Shen Yu glanced sideways. "Things flowed out of Shen's mansion. There are many people with mixed eyes, and there are many people who can touch your things," Xieting Zhou said. Shen Yu looked at him. "That little wooden sword is my favorite thing. Not many people know about it. Has anyone chosen?" Shen Yu directly said a name, Shen Yan. Xieting Zhou sat back again. "You forgot a more important person." Shen Yu said, "Who is it?" Xieting Zhou looked at her bewilderingly. "I'll tell you when you come over." Shen Yu leaned closer, waiting to hear the answer. Xieting Zhou supported the table, lowered his head and covered her lips under her probing eyes. Xieting Zhou had fire hidden in his body, and the kiss was fierce and wild. He didn't close his eyes, and his eyes were full of aggression. "It's me," he gasped and said to her between kisses. "It doesn't matter who took the thing. The important thing is that I am angry and you have to coax him. As for Zhang Ji, I want him to die." The hot breaths entwined each other, and Shen Yu wanted to speak, but was silenced by his kiss. The case was accidentally overturned when Xieting Zhou pressed over it, making a clang sound. Chang Lu shrank his neck under the eaves and said to himself, "It's over. The prince has lost his temper. Will he hit the princess? No, I have to tell Grandpa and let him persuade her." "It's so cold." The guard at the door rubbed his hands, and when he opened his mouth, white air came out. "Yeah, it's a weird day today. Why doesn't it snow this year? The weather this year is not right. It rained for days in spring and summer. Many places in the south were hit by disasters and the harvest was not good, leading to a sudden increase in refugees. Now it's winter, and it's getting colder day by day, but there's no sign of snow. The pond in the palace was covered with ice. Chang Liu didn't even dare to take the little turtle out, for fear that it would freeze into ice if he wasn't careful. The guards sent away the generals who had come to discuss matters. Just as they were about to close the door, they heard a faint sound of horse hooves. When I walked out of the door, I looked around and saw a Mercedes-Benz coming on a horse. Before I even reached the door, I started shouting. "Urgent report. 800 miles urgent. Go and ask for the prince." When the man reached the door, he almost rolled off his horse. As soon as the man dismounted, the horse also fell down, his whole body was steaming, and he was twitching on the ground. The guard checked and confirmed the waistband, did not dare to delay, and rushed in to find someone. The visitor didn't even have time to drink the water, and he spoke tremblingly, "Your Majesty, the Zihu people have made a comeback and raided Chaihe's camp a few days ago. The Xiao family army was defeated." "Say it again." Xie Tingzhou leaned forward. "It's not Yan Liang Pass, but Chaihe." "Yes, Boda led his men to raid Chaihe." Xie Tingzhou's eyebrows were filled with dark clouds. They didn't attack the weakly defended Yan Liang Pass, but they chose to attack the Xiao family's army. Why? Not allowing himself to think too much, Xie Tingzhou walked out and said, "Follow me to the camp and call all the generals." It was already dark outside and the wind was howling. 11 Feng caught up and put a cloak on Xie Tingzhou. Xie Tingzhou got on his horse and said, "Tell the princess not to wait for me and let her sleep first." After saying that, one person and one eagle, they set off and left. 11 Feng called the guards to explain the matter, mounted his horse and chased after him. There was a solemn atmosphere in the camp. Han Jiwu said, "Shengjing is closer to the north than us, so it stands to reason that the news will be received earlier than us. Is there any news about the imperial court sending troops?" No one answered the question, indicating that no one had received the message yet. The generals were sitting around, and Xie Tingzhou was sitting at the top with an expressionless face, but the candlelight made his expression look grim. "What was the damage in the battle at Chaihe?" The messenger said, "More than 5,000 people were killed or injured. There were sounds of breathing everywhere. The damage of 5,000 troops was no small matter. The total number of troops stationed on the Chaihe border was less than 50,000, and 10% of them were lost in the first battle." Xie Tingzhou glanced at the messenger and then lowered his eyes. "Chaihe is not a river, but a place name. To the west of Chaihe is a vast desert, and there is also yellow sand that cannot be grown in the pass. The pass is sparsely populated, and Tile tribes and Jalulu tribes from the western regions often cause trouble on the border. This time, Boda, the leader of the Zihu, personally led the troops. He used all his troops to raid a place where food could not be snatched. Why? Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, Reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 237. Xie Tingzhou was deep in thought, but Chang Hung stopped talking. Say it. Xie Tingzhou clearly didn't look at anyone, but he seemed to be able to understand all the movements around him. Chang Hung said, "I heard that the princess used to stay at the border all year round. She also had fights with Boda and is very familiar with the defense line in the west of the Zhou dynasty. Why not invite the princess to discuss it together? Maybe the princess can see something." Xie Tingzhou didn't answer. He raised his head after a moment. "She. Your Majesty, the princess and General Xiao are here," the soldier announced outside the camp. Chang Hung was overjoyed and said, "I said Cao and Cao are here, and the princess came at the right time." The soldier opened the curtain and Shen Yu walked in, followed by Xiao Chuan. "Princess," Chang Hung said. "You." Ahem. Han Jiwu coughed deliberately. Then Xie Tingzhou stood up, took off his cloak and put it on Shen Yu. "It's so cold and I don't even know how to put on my cloak. What will the girl in the yard do?" "It's okay, it's just that I was walking in a hurry." Shen Yu was actually not very cold. She was already hot from riding the horse all the way here. But the cloak was full of Xie Tingzhou's scent and his concern, and she couldn't bear to refuse. "Let's get down to business first. I brought Xiao Chuan here. Shen Yu put on her cloak and looked around to find the soldier who sent the emergency report. You tell him about the situation. Yes, the soldier briefly explained the situation to Xiao Chuan. Xiao Chuan lowered his head. How is my father? The soldier didn't know Xiao Chuan's family background or who he was referring to. General Xiao, he's my father. Xiao Chuan raised his head and said. The soldier said, General Xiao is fine, but your brother is injured. Xiao Chuan's shoulders relaxed. Oh, it's okay. It's none of my business if he gets hurt. Even if they are curious about the story, no one has time to explore it at the moment. Shen Yu looked at the sand table in the middle of the military tent. There were no distributions along the west side of the Great Zhou dynasty. However, the map had already been prepared and spread out on the commander's desk. About Chai He, tell me, Shen Yu said to Xiao Chuan. Xiao Chuan nodded. The Xiao family's army has been stationed here for hundreds of years. If the Zihu soldiers want to enter the pass, they must first cross the uninhabited desert. Marching here is difficult. Boda has never attacked this place with the main force before. Perhaps you generals will wonder why more than 40,000 people are stationed in such a barren place. The defense line to the west of the Great Zhou dynasty is nearly 600 miles. The Xiao family army is responsible for more than 200 miles of desert because there is no natural moat here. And there is no city wall like Yanliang Pass. It is difficult for the Zihu people to enter the pass, but it is not impossible. It is feasible to sneak in with a small force, so a large number of troops are needed for patrol. Han Jiwo looked at Shen Yu and said, Princess, it's like this. The Yanliangwan garrison was rebuilt last year and only had more than 30,000 people. Instead of attacking Yanliangwan, which was weaker in defense, Boda chose to attack the Xiao family's army. We haven't figured out the reason yet, so we asked the princess to enlighten us. Shen Yu stared at the map. Chai He and Yanliang Pass are on the same line to the west, and further north is Bailin. It can be said that the battle situation at Yanliang Pass is closely related to the battle situation at Chai He. Why did the Qingyun guards rush to Yanliang last year? Pass, but the Xiao family army who was closest could not go to support it because 2 of the 10 troops launched a surprise attack on Chai He at the same time as the battle at Yanliang Pass. Han Jiwo nodded thoughtfully. That means that if Boda wants to attack Yanliang Pass, he will launch an attack on Chai He to contain the troops. That's right. Xiao Chuan also affirmed this. This has always been the case. Once a war starts, both sides will start a war. But that's not right, Chang Hong said. Yanliang Pass was not attacked this time. Xiao Chuan said, I don't understand this. The Zihu people mainly want to rob the winter food before winter. Chai He is so poor that they don't even have any eggs. Why are they attacking Chai He? Shen Yu stared at the map and thought carefully. Why? Why not attack the wealthy Yanliangwan to seize food, but go to attack Chai He? She was also thinking about this issue. Boda changed her strategy. This was what she was thinking at the moment. Boda just needs people not to see through him so that he can be caught off guard. Could it be that they are planning to enter the country from Chai He? As soon as Chang Hong's question came out, he was immediately vetoed by Xie Tingzhou. It's too expensive to enter from Chai He, and the armaments in the desert can't keep up. And he didn't make it clear to you just now. Boda retreated after a battle. No, go deep. Now it's even more puzzling. Dad, Boda, these 2 people alternated in Shen Yu's mind. I remember last year you made a plan to strengthen the city defense before leaving Yanliang Pass, right? Shen Yu asked Xie Tingzhou with some uncertainty. At that time, she focused all her energy on revenge and did not pay attention to these details. She only had a general impression. Xie Tingzhou nodded. I know about this. Zifeng, who had been silent for a long time, finally spoke. At that time, we paid the money in advance in Bailin. Later, the court had some money to fill the hole, which resulted in no money to suppress the bandits later. The suppression of the bandits took a long time. Shen Yu said, after strengthening the city wall and adding more garrison troops, Yanliang Pass will not be as easy to attack as last year. But without the Shen family army in front, no matter how strong the city wall is, it will not be able to hold up for long. But why didn't they attack? Chang Hung was puzzled, so they chose to attack Chai He? But what do they want? Shen Yu suddenly raised her head and was awakened by the sentence. Boda will not do meaningless things, they must have a purpose. They will definitely attack Yanliang Pass, Xie Zhou said slowly, but they seem to be waiting. No matter what they are waiting for, whether it is an opportunity or food and grass, they will definitely attack Yanliang Pass. Because if they don't snatch food from Yanliang Pass, then mobilizing troops will only make things worse for the Zihu people. What they want is food and grass. Shen Yu said, to attack Chai He first, I am waiting for the opportunity to get rid of my left and right arm first. So they may have more plans this time, such as capturing Yanliang Pass or even going deep into the Great Zhou dynasty. The discussion went to the middle of the moon and finally broke up. Xie Zhou and Shen Yu rode together on the same horse when they returned. They were both wearing a large cloak, with their backs and chests touching each other. Xie Zhou didn't speak. He rode his horse very slowly. He already had a premonition that Shen Yu had something to say, and he was waiting for her to speak. I'm going to Yanliang Pass. It's not that she wants to go, but she has made up her mind to go. Xie Zhou hugged her and didn't speak for a while. Yanliang Pass is the place where Shen Yu has a long-lasting nightmare. Even now, Xie Zhou could still hear her rapid breathing at night due to the nightmare, and touch her tears overflowing from fear and pain. She is indestructible in the sun, but shatters at night. Xie Zhou's strength and gentleness cannot repair his lover. As long as the nightmare is not eliminated, she will not be complete. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 238. Xie Zhou wanted to keep her, but also wanted to let her go. He was suffering in such a dilemma, and his decision to kill was now empty talk. He was just a husband. Do I have to go? Xie Zhou asked. The sound of horse hooves is neither fast nor slow. Shen Yu turned her head slightly, but still couldn't see his expression, so she turned her head again. Do you want to run a horse race? She asked. Before Xie Zhou could answer, Shen Yu added, how about we have a race to see who gets home first? Xie Zhou thought for a moment, where's the bet? Bet on whether I will go to Yanliang Pass, Shen Yu said and whistled. Ben Xiao approached and she jumped up. Xie Zhou was still taking off his cloak, put on the cloak. She smiled slyly at him under the moonlight, and Ben Xiao rushed out immediately, her voice carried in the wind. The cloak is in the way, so wear it yourself. Xie Zhou smiled, raised his whip and chased after him. An eagle chirped in the air, white feathers soared into the sky, wings streaked across the blue-black sky, and rushed forward in the night. Shen Yu lay low on the horse. The night wind in the north is very cold and strong, somewhat similar to Yanliang Pass. For a moment, she seemed to have traveled through time and space to get there. The horses hooves stepped on the piles of corpses, splashing blood. They overflowed the horses' hooves, trying to drag her in like they did in every nightmare. The cold wind howled in her ears, and the sound of horse hooves behind her pulled her back again. She glanced back, and Xie Zhou was chasing after her, from half a horse's length away to neck and neck. They looked at each other on horseback, approaching the city gate. The guards on the city wall had already seen the two people walking side by side and the goshawk above their heads. Open the door. The prince and princess are back. The two riders passed through the city side by side, and the palace was already in front of them. Xie Zhou turned his head and took a deep look at her, and the horse gradually slowed down. Shen Yu reined in the horse in front of the palace gate. The horse's hoofs were raised in the cold wind, and it neighed and stopped steadily. Yu Wen Xieting Zhou rode his horse and walked slowly over. Shen Yu looked at him and didn't know what to say. She understood what Xieting Zhou meant. He replaced his answer in this way. It was so difficult to make the decision, but he did it after all. Xieting Zhou got off his horse and stretched out his hands toward her. Are you cold? I'll carry you in. Shen Yu leaned over and ran into his arms, hugging his neck tightly. Surprisingly, they did nothing tonight. Shen Yu sat on the low couch next to the window, lying in front of the window, her hair spread behind her. Xieting Zhou came out of the shower and held her in his arms behind him. The night breeze was a bit cold, and her hands were cold to the touch. She reached out to close the window. Why don't you close the window? Shen Yu held his hand and said, Don't turn it off, I'm watching. What are you looking at? Home. Xieting Zhou's breath was right next to her ears, and the two of them looked out the window together. Shen Yu said softly, I used to call Yan Liangwen my home. Later, it became the place where my nightmares began. I was afraid to go near that place. After that battle, I would fall into nightmares every day in Yan Liangwen. I thought I could get out with time, but I couldn't. My brother said that you have to get up from where you fell. This I agree with that. I want to conquer my fear. Xieting Zhou hugged her and gently closed his eyes in the fragrance of her body. My Au is the bravest woman in the world. Shen Yu smiled and nuzzled into his arms. His arms were the most reassuring place in the world for her, but even if she lay in his arms every night, she would still occasionally fall into nightmares. My father died in the conspiracy of the Zhou people, and also died under the sword of the Zihu people. I can't just point my sword at the disasters of the Zhou dynasty and forget about the foreign enemies. I hate them all equally, and all of them killed my father, and 100,000 soldiers should all be punished. Xieting Zhou felt the excitement hidden under her calm words, wrapped his arms around her and caressed her gently. I can't go with you, he said, you have to walk part of that road by yourself. I know, Shen Yu said, you have to guard the northern defense line here. To the north of the great Zhou dynasty were the Baiki people. Xieting Zhou was injured in a fierce battle a few years ago, and both sides were severely weakened. After that, the two sides entered a relatively calm stage, with only occasional disturbances, but they had to be on guard against foreign enemies, and they needed to remain vigilant at all times. Qingyuan Guard is an iron wall between Baiki and Dazhu. And heavy snow is the second one. Every year in the middle of winter, after heavy snow seals the mountains, the Baiki people cannot cross the mountain ridge. Only then can the north be considered completely safe and the war completely stop. This is the coldest and most peaceful time in Bailin. Xieting Zhou said, yeah, the snow came late this year. The snow held back his steps, making him unable to fly out even if he wanted to follow her. I will allocate 20,000 Qingyuan guards to accompany you to Yanliang Pass, Xieting Zhou said. No, Shen Yu immediately refused, it hasn't snowed yet in Bailin. Once the defense line is weak, if the Baiki people take this opportunity to launch a surprise attack, Bailin will be very passive and even in danger. Xieting Zhou also knew this. 100 years ago, when the Zhou dynasty was rich and powerful, there were more than 600,000 soldiers and horses in the territory. Now the north is still as solid as a rock, but the various areas on the border are being weakened step by step. Taken together, the military strength is less than half of what it was 100 years ago. Why doesn't this damn snow fall? Shen Yu said, I will take Xiao Chuan and 5,000 soldiers and horses, and then select some useful ones from the new recruits. I will not take the rest of the soldiers who have not been trained yet. You can train my soldiers in Bailin. This will add up. There are probably about 10,000 people, and with the garrison at Yanliang Pass, they can resist for at least some time. Okay, wait for me. Xieting Zhou hugged her tightly, I'll come when it snows. Shen Yu turned back, Xieting Zhou lowered his head, and they kissed each other deeply, hugging each other for warmth in the cold wind, enjoying the last peace before parting. The next day, people in the palace were coming and going, and civil and military officials were constantly coming in and out of the meeting hall to discuss matters such as sending troops and providing supplies. "We can get the people from Wantung escort to move," Xie said. "The princess and I have negotiated with them on the road before. He Sui will take the grain transport officer in charge of the baggage to get familiar with the route in depth so that he can arrange the next baggage route." Shen Yu suddenly asked Xiao Chuan, "Have the troops and horses been ordered?" "Okay," Xiao Chuan said. 5,000 people were selected from the recruits. These 5,000 people will not be worse than the new garrison formed by Yan Liang Pass. The rest of the recruits heard that they were going to fight the Zihu people. "Come on, I didn't let you." Shen Yu nodded. "Well, recruits who haven't been trained can't go to the battlefield. If these 5,000 people go to Yan Liang Pass, I will only be responsible for the logistics." Xie Tingzhou turned his head and said, "The army is marching along the northwest route. Marquis Xianping is in the south and cannot be an obstacle to you at this moment. Xiao Chuan will lead a small scout team to go ahead lightly. I will ask Changliu to follow you. He is not good at anything else. Running errands is fast." Xie Tingzhou said almost everything he could think of. The war with the Beirong people here quoted the pre-Qin era's doctrine of no troops in winter and summer. This doctrine was broken in the Han-Hungarian War and successfully shook the economic foundation of the Xiongnu, but it also paid a heavy price. Therefore, in ancient times, there was a rule not to fight in winter. As for how to fight, it is recommended not to dwell on the details. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Treating the Concubine, Eliminating the Wife, Reborn, I Refuse to Marry the Scumbag and Marry the Prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 239. Shen Yu is wearing armor. That was the armor that the old prince had specially asked the best military craftsman in Bailin to make for her. It was made of the best materials. It was lighter and harder than the armor of ordinary soldiers, and was suitable for women. Xie Tingzhou did not step forward to help, but looked at her from the side. Shen Yu did not forget to chatter when she was wearing armor. "If there is a war in Bailin, you can just press the formation from the rear. There are generals in Bailin, go to the front and fight, they can withstand it, so don't show off." Xie Tingzhou once thought about sending a lieutenant to follow her, but he also knew in his heart that it would be useless to send a lieutenant who did not know the terrain and battle lines. He would not have a tacit understanding with the soldiers and it would be difficult to fight. Also, it's getting cold, and it's time for the ground dragon to start burning. I remember you were particularly afraid of the cold last year, and the stove was always lit in the carriage. After Shen Yu finished speaking, she didn't hear any response. She turned around and saw Xie Tingzhou looking straight at her. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah, I heard it," Xie Tingzhou said. Shen Yu walked over and handed him the armor that needed to be buckled at the end. "Button it on for me." Xie Tingzhou lowered his eyes, put on the armor for her with his bamboo-like fingers, and straightened it carefully. Parting is always heavy, and Shen Yu wanted to make the atmosphere lighter. "Are we on the wrong side?" Shen Yu said with a smile. "We are all wives waiting for their husbands to come home from the war. How about you call me husband?" Shen Yu teased him. Xie Tingzhou finally raised his eyelids with some energy. "Really? Then who is on top?" "It's not you every time," Shen Yu said, looking at his face and reaching out to touch his cheek. "I'm not at home. You are not allowed to look at other people, not even maids. If someone gives you a woman, you tell them to go away. If someone asks you to marry a concubine, you also tell them to go away." Xie Tingzhou listened to her childish words. "Then what if I accept it?" "Then just wait until I come back to chop you," Shen Yu said viciously. "Who to kill?" What do you think? Xietingzhou said, then I will accept it and tell them that my princess is very fierce and knows how to cut people. Those who are afraid of death will run away quickly. Those who are not afraid of death will be kept for my princess to sharpen her knife. Shen Yu laughed and stood on tiptoes to kiss him. Xietingzhou was too tall, and she couldn't reach him as long as she didn't lower her head. Xietingzhou looked down at her, and when she gave up and put her feet back, he grabbed her waist, pushed her down and kissed her. Auntie Xietingzhou's voice was trembling, wait for me. He pecked her and said, you must wait for me. I will come when the snow closes the mountains. It's still dark. There were blazing torches burning outside the royal capital city, lighting up almost half of the sky. Firewood was set up in the center, and cattle and sheep were killed to sacrifice tooth flags and war drums. The soldiers' steps were uniform and they had already begun to set off. Ben Xiao's hooves scratched the ground, as if he already knew that they were about to head towards the place where he was born. Shen Yu got on her horse and looked deeply at Xietingzhou with lowered eyes. She wanted to kiss him again. She hid her love in tenderness that could be seen at a glance. Xietingzhou understood and got on his horse. Everyone tacitly stayed far away, watching their prince riding a horse to send the princess out of the city. He wanted to send her 10 miles away. The road went very quickly, and soon we arrived and it was dawn. Xietingzhou gently touched her cheek in the morning light and said with a smile, wait for me. The man and his horse followed the army. Bai Yu fluttered his wings and saw Xietingzhou off again in the morning light. He was always sending her on far journeys and watching her fly higher and higher. Even if it's 10 miles to say goodbye and 1,000 miles to welcome, he will always catch up, just like before. The wind and sand outside Yanliang Pass remain the same. Sir, when will the reinforcements from the imperial court arrive? The new governor of Ganzhou City in Yanliang Pass, who took office less than a year ago, squinted his eyes in the wind, soon. He couldn't tell the truth. He still hadn't received any news from the imperial court about sending reinforcements. This inevitable result is actually not difficult to guess. Yanliang Pass was hit hard last year, and civil strife continued within the Zhou dynasty. Originally, Balin could still be counted on, but now the relationship between Balin and the imperial court is very delicate, and there may not be enough troops to rescue Yanliang Pass. Sir, a soldier gasped and shouted excitedly under the city wall, there are reinforcements. At the north gate. Cao Guangjin was shocked. North gate, north, could it be someone coming from the north? He quickly got off the city wall and followed the soldiers up the city wall at the north gate. There were 2 people outside the city wall, one was a young boy of 15 or 16 years old, holding a piece of dried meat in his mouth, looking up at the city wall, waving when he saw someone, and the other was a thin man in his early 20s. Where are the reinforcements? Cao Guangjin asked. The soldier pointed at the boy at the bottom of the city and said, he said the army is still behind and will arrive in about half a day. He is here to deliver a message. Cao Guangjin said, put the basket down and ask him to put the letter up. Now that the war situation is tense, no outsider dares to go into the city. If the defense deployment is leaked, it will be a big deal. The letter was quickly brought up. Cao Guangjin read it quickly and said, let him in. Changliu and Sixi rode into the city. When they saw Cao Guangjin walking down the city wall, they asked, are you Mr. Cao? Exactly. Cao Guangjin looked solemn, let's talk inside. I won't talk to you, Changliu said, I'll talk to you after our princess arrives. Cao Guangjin asked, Your Majesty didn't come. Changliu said, that's natural. Our prince has to guard the northern defense line. Where can we go? How many people did the princess bring this time? Changliu stretched out a finger and said, 10,000. Cao Guangjin said anxiously, how can 10,000 repel the western Jew dogs? Chang Liu didn't like the person in front of him very much. They came all the way to reinforce him. Seeing Cao Guangjin looking down on him, he said, "We'll talk about it later. Is there food? I'm starved to death." Shen Yu led his troops to camp 5 miles away from Yanliang Pass, and took Xiao Chuan into the city alone. Cao Guangjin welcomed the two of them into the city. It was dinner time, so he prepared wine and dishes for them. "Princess, please forgive me, given the current situation, I cannot let your troops enter the city immediately. Shen Yu understands that in today's current situation, no one can tell whether they are friends or foes." She looked at the Cao Guangjin, who was alert and didn't look like a waste. "Master Cao, how is the situation now?" Cao Guangjin said, "The Zihu people launched an attack 3 days ago. We didn't have enough troops to leave the city, so we could only defend and fight. They brought trebuchets. We lost a lot of people, and the city wall was also being repaired. But these 3 they did not launch another attack in Japan, and I don't know if they were short of food and grass." "No," Shen Yu said, "if there is insufficient food and grass, they will only attack quickly and capture the city in the shortest possible time. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi." Chapter 240. After hearing her analysis, Cao Guangjin couldn't help but look at the person in front of him. "The person in front of me is Shenzhongan's daughter, the late emperor's appointed Marquis of Duyu, and now the Princess of Bailin. She has a petite figure, bright eyes, and white teeth. Apart from her heroic features, there is really no trace of a general in her body." Cao Guanggang was transferred less than a year ago. When he went to Shenjing to report on his duties, he had seen Shenzhongan and Shen Zhao. How heroic the two generals were! It's not that Cao Guangjin looks down on women, it's that he has never seen a woman who can play a big role on the battlefield. She can just make a fire and cook in the back. But just now I heard her judgment on the military situation, which was quite impressive, and her attitude became more respectful than before. "What the princess said makes sense," Cao Guangjin said. "Then according to the princess, what are they planning?" Shen Yu smiled faintly. "I just arrived at Yanliang Pass, and I can analyze what they are planning based on just a few details. Mr. Cao thinks too highly of me." Cao Guangjin was ashamed. "I acted too hastily. I came out in a hurry. The Zihu people don't know when they will attack again. Even if they defend, it will be a big waste." Shen Yu said, "I analyzed the situation with the prince before I came here, and I guessed that they attacked Chaihe before to remove the support from Yanliang Pass." Cao Guangjin also analyzed the battle reports over the years, but as far as I know, when they attacked Yanliang Pass, didn't they attack Chaihe at the same time to contain it? Why bother? Then why not this year? Shen Yu asked. Cao Guangjin was startled when he was asked, "The princess has asked me, and I hope you can give me some advice." Shen Yu frowned slightly. "I suspect that they are doing this to mobilize the troops who fought against the Xiao family's army in Chaihe and attack Yanliang Pass with all their strength." "What?" Cao Guangjin stood up with a cry, "This is impossible. If the Xiao family army comes to support, won't it be harder for them to fight?" Shen Yu took a sip of tea and said, "That's why they attacked Chaihe first, to create the illusion that they were entering from Chaihe. The Xiao family army was under such heavy pressure. Even if they were not attacked later, they would not dare to deploy troops without authorization. When reinforcements came, Yanliangwen fell into an isolated and helpless situation." Cao Guangjin fell back into his chair as if struck by lightning, unable to move his mind for a long time. "Master Cao, there is no need to panic at this moment." Shen Yu calmly put down the teacup. "We still have time to buffer." Cao Guangjin said anxiously, "Don't panic. If they attack again, how can we stop them?" "Another attack is inevitable," Shen Yu said seriously, "but we are not in despair yet. After the analysis just now, Cao Guangjin was convinced and guessed that this was probably the prince's plan before the princess left for the expedition. Shen Yu continued, why did they retreat after attacking 3 days ago? How do I know this? Cao Guangjin said, I used to think that the Zihu people were waiting for backup supplies, but after the princess analysis, I felt it was wrong. Shen Yu said, maybe they are waiting for some opportunity, but I still don't know what it is. In fact, Shen Yu didn't completely understand. She had a very crazy guess. In the past, Marquis Xianping and Li Yanchang were able to kill hundreds of thousands of soldiers for their own selfish purposes, and now they can also cooperate with the Zihu people internally and externally for their own selfish interests. But she couldn't say it right now, for fear that the news of internal and external troubles would disturb the morale of the army. Now we can only hold on until reinforcements arrive, Shen Yu said. Cao Guangjin thought to himself that since the princess was here, King Balin could not leave her here alone. Reinforcements would arrive sooner or later, and he felt a little reassured. Don't worry, princess. Due to last year's war, the imperial court stopped supplying grain and grass from the southwest granary in order to avoid repeating the same mistake. Now the granary reserves in Ganzhou city are very sufficient. Even if the imperial court does not have grain and grass supplies, it can still sustain us for more than a month. Shen Yu nodded, most of the people from Zihu came here for this granary. After discussing the matter, Cao Guangjin asked Shen Yu and others to stay overnight in the city. Shen Yu refused, so Cao Guangjin sent several people to the gate of the city. Princess, forgive me, Cao Guangjin said bluntly, I am grateful to the princess for her reinforcements from thousands of miles away, but the princess also knows that the message has been spread throughout the Zhou dynasty. Without Chenjing's order, I cannot leave the mobilization of the garrison to the princess. Shen Yu got on her horse and looked down at Cao Guangjin, if I say that I don't value your military power, I'm afraid you won't believe it, but that's the truth. Shen Yu turned the horse's head and looked back at Cao Guangjin. I forgot to remind Sir Cao that 3 days have passed since the last attack. In less than 2 days, the Zihu people will attack again. Sir, hurry up and arrange for manpower to dig trench. A chill suddenly ran down Cao Guangjin's back. I still wanted to ask for more details, but Shen Yu had already raised her whip and left, followed by several people who came with her. Before reaching the camp, Shen Yu slowed down and said, did you hear everything? Xiao Chuan nodded, this Cao Guangjin wants us to help, but he is also afraid of Shen Jing's pursuit. He doesn't want to offend anyone. How can there be such a good thing in the world? Could it be that he wants our soldiers to obey his orders? Idea. Shen Yu snorted and said, this is a good person. He has a tough attitude, but he keeps his posture extremely low. Fortunately, the princess knows things well, Xiao Chuan said, if it hadn't been delayed for a few days and waited until he was worried, I guarantee that he would not have the good attitude he has today. Shen Yu led an army of 10,000 people to march day and night and arrived at the territory before the Zihu people attacked, but did not provide immediate support because she expected that the reinforced city wall and garrison at Yanliang Pass could withstand the Zihu people's first attack. Wave attack. In the past, Shen Yu would have jumped into the battlefield immediately. It was Xie Tingzhou who taught her step by step how to control people's hearts. There is no better way to attack a city than to attack the heart. If Cao Guangjin had not been made to feel isolated and helpless, there would never have been the friendship and good attitude he had today, and conflicts would easily arise when the two armies met in the future. Shen Yu looked back at Changliu and Sixi, what about you? How are you doing? Changliu is ignorant and naive, and it is easy for people to let down their guard just by looking at him, while Sixi looks thin and sluggish, but in fact he is a smart person. It would be a good idea for the two of them to get some information together. Changliu jumped forward on his horse, Princess, we have inquired about it. This Cao Guang has indeed done some practical things in the year since he entered Yanliang Pass. There are 3 fires for a new official to take office, Shen Yu said leisurely. This fire has not been burned out yet. The common people have good evaluations of him. He seems to be a good official, Chang Liu said. Shen Yu smiled and said, you are naive, aren't you? Then do you know how many concubines Cao Guangjin has? Chang Liu was asked, aren't you asking about how he is an official? Why should I ask about this if I have nothing to do? You tell me, Shen Yu gestured to Sixi. Yes, Sixi said, this Cao Guangjin has a total of 13 concubines. In the year he came to Ganzhou alone, he brought 2 of them into the house. The youngest one is only 17. Ah, Chang Liu's face suddenly collapsed. He is already that old and can be a father. Understood. Shen Yu tapped Chang Liu on the head with a riding crop. You can't just look at what others put out for you. The world of adults is too complicated, Chang Liu muttered. Can't life be simpler? Shen Yu said, believe it or not, if Cao Guangjin repels the Zihu people, he can turn his sword on us and take me to claim credit from Shengjing. In order to avoid everyone thinking that Yanliang Pass is a checkpoint and Ganzhou is another, I will explain here. Yanliang Pass is a pass, and the city inside the pass is called Ganzhou. I referred to ancient maps for this, but I made up the name blindly.